One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
All right, so today we are going to paint this Reaper Bones Blackmane Gnoll Ravager. This is a Julie Guthrie sculpt, and it's in the Bones USA plastic. It's a pretty cool little figure. And what we're going to do, we're going to focus on skin and fur. We're going to make him look like a bit like a hyena, which I know is pretty cliche for gnolls. It's kind of the way everybody paints them. But we're going to roll with it. And a couple of things about this mini. First one is that it does have quite a few mold lines. So it's worth taking a bit of extra time to clean those up. Best way to do that is get your hobby knife with a nice sharp new blade in it and just slowly carve away those mold lines. Just take your time, try to avoid doing any damage to the mini. Some of them are pretty hard to get. Like if you look right in there on his forearm, there's one. Very hard to see, very hard to get access to. Sometimes better just to leave those or to put a little bit of gloss varnish or something on them to make them smooth out a little bit, rather than do a lot of damage to the mini, especially if you're just aiming for a tabletop mini or you're not very practiced yet at removing mold lines. It's a pretty tough one to get into. Second thing is that I was reading some questions from people on the Reaper Facebook group yesterday about how to deal with the bases on these. They come with an integral plastic base, which is sort of an oval shape. It has a little bit of a rim on it. But they don't look too bad as gaming pieces, but they're not kind of a standard size. So let's say you're playing Dungeons & Dragons or something like that has a 1-inch grid, a 1-inch table grid, then you might want to put a different base on it. So in that case, what I usually do is I warm up the plastic, make it a bit softer, use some pliers, not pliers, like a sprue cutter, okay, and just clip away at a bit of the plastic until you've got enough removed that you can attach it to a base. And then what I do is fill in around it with green stuff or similar putty and just do a little bit of sculpting work to give it some little shapes to the stones. So there's a texture like this on the base to start with, and I just extended it out into the green stuff. So I clipped away the bottom of the base. You can see a little bit of the base still shows there. Okay, and then glued it into the base, put green stuff around it, sculpted it to make it fit into the base. Always worth enhancing the bases a little bit. I typically, certainly for gaming pieces, I don't tend to do too much to them, but you want to do just enough that it looks polished. And later, when you're feeling skilled at it, go for it. Do tons of extra work on it, add layers, add levels to it. Make it as complex as you want. But when you're starting out, good to get in the habit of just doing at least a little bit of the base every time till you get practice. And then when you're good at painting, people don't look at your mini and go, lovely mini, but why didn't you bother with the base? Right? Which is fair. And I see that comment quite a lot on people's posts where people say, yeah, it looks lovely, and it only took you 25 minutes to paint. Oh, it's great, but you didn't do anything on the base. And I've heard lots of people comment that a good base will hide a badly painted mini, there's some truth to that. But you certainly don't want to have a base that's so bad that it makes your paint job look worse, which is, can be disappointing. All right, so we're taking a little bit of time on that side of mini prep. This one I've airbrushed it with some black paint as a first coat. You don't need a primer. You don't specifically need something that melts the surface and gives it extra tooth for paint to grip to when you're painting bones. You just need the first coat of paint to stick. And the way we do that, I start out by painting black paint through the airbrush. You can also brush it on. It's faster with an airbrush. Just don't thin it with water when you put the first coat of paint on. It'll stick just fine, and then after that you're good to go. You don't need to use a priming type paint. Just use any paint to put the first coat of paint on. Hope that makes sense. And then after that, I use the airbrush, put a little bit of a white zenithal highlight. This just means putting some paint top down so that the different shapes and surfaces are visible. You don't need to do this for a kind of a starting out learning paint job, but it does make it much easier to see the different shapes and features of the miniature on camera, which is the main reason I do it. Okay. The other thing is always start out the mini knowing what your light direction is. And in this case, I think this guy's got a pretty dramatic, like head thrown back, like kind of screaming at the sky kind of thing. So I'm going to do the light shining on him from the right. The light's going to be shining on him this way. So we're going to highlight this side of his body brighter. This axis is going to be a bit brighter. We'll do a bit of a reflection on this one. And this side of the base is going to be lighter. And that's so he looks dramatic with the light coming in from one side versus the other. That's the general idea. It's going to have black, really dark brown, almost black fur to start with. And we're going to highlight it with a bit of an intense brown color. And his skin tone is going to be sort of a yellowy lion fur kind of looking thing. And we'll put some brown dots on it to make it look like it's a bit hyena-like. And then we'll do all of his leather, some metal on his axes. And that'll pretty much be him done at that point. It's a pretty basic, straightforward mini to paint. That's the general idea. If you're following along on either Twitch or Discord, feel free to ask questions. I'm happy to take your questions. And if you're following on the Discord, you can always drop photos in the Discord, and I'll pause the recording of this, and then we'll give you some feedback on your paint job before we continue on to the next phase. All right, so the paints I'm going to use today, as I said, I'm going to use a very dark brown for the fur. I'm going to use Reaper 9137 black and brown for the base coat on the fur, and 9138 intense brown is going to be the highlight color on the fur. So black and brown and intense brown, and I'll probably lighten this a little bit with another color for the highlighting. And then for his main skin color, we're going to use, this is the Ochre Gold Triad from Reaper. So 9073 Chestnut Gold, 9074 Palomino Gold, 9075 Buckskin Pale. This is going to be the main skin tone. Outside of that, we're going to use like Harvest Brown for the leather, Russet Brown and Harvest Brown for the various leather bits, and then we'll just use Hone Steel or something like that for his axe. Nothing too complicated going on there. As usual, I will use this handy solid white for anything I need to have white to do highlighting. I think he's quite a yellowy looking guy, so I'm going to use Reaper 9033 as my main highlighting. I'm going to add this paint to create highlights to any other paints. And then I need a dark color to be my black. Let's use, I feel like using purple today for some reason. Let's use purple. Where's Nightshade Purple? Nightshade Purple will be my black today. So essentially, Golden Blonde is going to be used for white. Nightshade Purple will be used for black. All the other colors will get highlighted and shaded with tints and shades made from those two colors. So let's start out by putting a big blob of Nightshade Purple on the palette. Don't really need that much Nightshade Purple. It's one of those paints that goes a long way. It's a very, very strong color. Probably one of the, I have a couple of paints on my palette that are on my painting desk that are really stained clothing, and that Nightshade Purple is one of them. It's a very strong color. Love it. And then we're going to get our black and brown and intense brown for the mane and the fur. So let's put the black and brown on there first. Oh, that's gross. It's all dried up. Chunky. Lovely. Get rid of all that gunk off the end of it. See, there's the dried bits that just cleaned off there. We don't really want those in the wet palette. And it looks like the tip of this is dried, so I'll get my handy pin and clean that out before we put it on the palette. When you're cleaning it out, you just put the pin in and try not to shove the chunks down into the neck of the bottle. Just gently to work the pin in. And then when I go pull out, I'm going to really work the pin a lot and use that to pull out as much of the dried paint in the neck as I can. Work it out. There we go. So that's all the junk that came out of there. And we'll wipe that on a paper towel. Not the paper towel I'm going to use for drying my brush today. Use an old piece of paper towel for that. Clean off the tip of that. And there we go. We'll add our black and brown into the palette. And we'll do the same thing with the intense brown. I haven't used this paint in a while. It's probably dried up too. Oh, look at that. Yeah, gross. Big old chunks of paint coming off of that. Clean that off, same as the other one. And do the trick with the pin again. Get all that junk out of there. Yeah. Lovely dried chunks of paint. There we go. And we'll put that in the palette. Don't need as much of that color. And then, what did I say? Harvest brown and russet brown are the leather. I'll put the leather colors down here. Use those colors all the time, so they don't need really to be shaken up too much or cleaned up. I lied. Look at that. Look at the junk dried on that. I probably used those paints 2 days ago. There we go. And so I'm guessing the Palomino gold is going to be pretty gross too. I'm going to put a bit of white over on this side of the palette. There we go. White never seems to be a problem. I use it every day. All right, so chestnut gold. Let's look at that before we chuck it in the palette. Oh no, it's not too bad. So put that in the middle. There's lots of very similar colors going into the palette today. That's going to be interesting to play with. Palomino gold. Oh yeah, that one's all crusted. Gross and crusty. Just like my painting. That's a little joke for the peanut gallery at the back of the room here.
I was thinking it.
Thank you. My buddy Roger's back there on the other side of the wall working on some cool terrain projects. As usual. It's good to have somebody in here I can make self-depreciating comments and he agrees with them to keep me humble. Don't worry, I do the same thing for him. All right. First things first. Let's get the first coat of paint onto... Oh, you know what? I need some metallic. Guess we can wait till later for the metallic. That's not gonna. There's not a lot of it. There's a lot of bone, a lot of leather, very little metallic. So I'm not too worried about that. Okay, so we'll just get started. Getting a nice big brush. This is a size 2 brush. I'm gonna start with black and brown. I'm not thinning this. I'm just rolling it to smooth it out a bit. I might need to put a little bit of water in that today. It is pretty dry here. You know, it's not too bad. Okay, so that's going to be my base coat color on the fur. So the fur that we're going to be looking at is in his ears, around his mane, over his shoulders, and then he's got some fur on the back of his legs. Not too much. He's got a little nubby tail, and on the back of his arms is what we want to paint this color. So you don't have to necessarily do it exactly the way I do it, but we do want to get all of his fur this color. So I'm going to start up by his mouth, and I'm going to start with the fur under his chin. We're going to paint under his chin, and those little mutton chops he's got going on are all going to be this color. Oh, I just noticed he's got some metal earrings in those ears. We'll probably make those gold. Maybe we can make them bone. I have to try to remember that. Make those bone instead of what I usually do, make them gold. Give him some bone earrings because he's kind of a barbaric looking dude. Get the inside of his ears. Hyenas have no hair on their nose too. So we want to go across the top of his nose. Make sure we get that crest. This is all going to be this very dark color. And since I've got this dark color going, I'm going to do his eye sockets this color as well. Hope you can see that. It's not the greatest focus, I know, because of the angle I'm holding it on. Go back to the other angle. There we go. So, shoulders. Put this in around that necklace as well. Make that really that dark black and brown color. There'll be a bit of shoulder around those fangs that he's got on his little necklace. Getting around the hair on the shoulders. I'm not super concerned about this being a perfect smooth coat of paint because there's a lot of texture in that fur. So what I am going to do, I'm going to give it a good base coat with this black and brown, and then I'm going to do nightshade purple wash over it to really darken the shadows and the fur down. And then we'll do a little bit of dry brushing and take advantage of that nice fur texture to bring that up. And we'll do all of that, hopefully, fairly efficiently before we do the skin. I don't want to do the skin and then do dry brushing, because dry brushing is a messy technique. You hit areas that you don't necessarily want to hit, especially if you don't have a if you have a fairly large brush. It also tends to create a little bit of powderiness that can go onto adjacent surfaces, and when we paint the skin, that'll get cleaned up. So that's my plan. Do his arm. This is his right arm. Do the back of his left arm. The fur basically starts right at the elbow and then goes down to those leather thongs he's got across his wrists. There you go. And he's got the black bushy tail that will paint this color as well. Just going slow, working the paint, and making sure we get it into the low areas. Normally I'd be very careful about going back over the same area twice, but because of the fur texture, it's not really that much of an issue. I have to be quite as careful. Oh, look at this. Got it. This fur goes up the inside of his legs too a little bit. Alongside of that cloth he's got hanging down. So we'll do that brown as well. Look at that, he's got hair on the inside of his legs, but he doesn't have hair on his armpits. It's an interesting choice. Fur on the back of his legs, right down to his ankle. On both legs. So work his way down. Right down to the... Actually, the fur goes right to the bottom of his right leg. So right to the bottom of his right foot. It doesn't go down quite as far on the other leg, which is odd. We'll just pretend that it does, and we'll paint it that color anyway. Okay, that's the bulk of what I wanted to do. Just do a quick check over to see if we missed any bits of fur. Make sure we get those filled in. We want to do the end of his nose as well. Give him like a little. We're going to give him a little black nose. Okay, that looks like all the fur. Okay, so that's going to need a minute to dry. Don't really want to do a lot of other stuff because I don't want the dry brushing to make a mess everywhere. One thing I can do while I'm waiting is to do a bit of the stone. So I'm going to use my favorite gray, Reaper Stone Gray. And let's just put some gray on the base while we're waiting. Doesn't matter what gray you use, but you can mix one of your own if you want. Just want kind of a neutral color on there. And we'll give that a base coat while we're waiting for the other paint to dry. There we go, a little bit of a neutral gray color on there. And I'm just, because I tend to forget, I'm going to put an arrow there on the base. So I remember that's my light direction. And I don't forget that going forward. This does not have to be perfect. In fact, I want it to be kind of an irregular looking base coat so that it looks more like natural stone. Don't want it to be perfectly smooth like it's, you know, the best, finest, smoothest marble or something like that. We want it to be kind of rough, beat up, dungeony looking. This guy is clearly a dungeon dweller. All right, next thing we're going to do, we want to make a wash with the Nightshade Purple. So I'm going to grab a little dollop of Nightshade Purple. I'm going to put it over here to the side. Now you could use Reaper Wash Medium if you wanted to make your wash, but don't really need to do that for this. If I was trying to do something smoother, I would use the Wash Medium, but I'm not too concerned about that. So I'm just going to add a whole bunch of water into this mix, make it really goopy. It's mostly water now. And I'm going to just slather that. Let's give you an idea of how thick it is. Not very thick. I'm just going to slather that all over anything that I've painted fur, including his face. Now what I don't want to do is put so much paint on there that it never dries. So I'm going to start at the top of his head, work my way back along his head, left side of the face, then the right side of the face. And I'm just going to go slowly and allow time for the paint to flow off and get into the low spots. And then I'm going to slowly move the brush along. What I don't want to do is create a flood like that. There's a big flood in there and then leave it. That'll take forever to dry. I want to take that paint and move it around, move it into the low spots, and keep the brush moving slowly so that it picks up the excess back into the brush, and I don't leave puddles that are going to take hours to dry. I think that's a mistake that I see people make a lot in the beginner classes, is that they get their favorite shade paint and they slather it on, wait 5 minutes, and then go and try to dry brush. And what inevitably happens is the brush picks up the paint from that wash, and then it mixes with the paint on their dry brush, and they end up with a goopy, streaky mess, not a light, gentle addition of color to the raised surfaces, which is really what we're looking for here. If you miss and the paint goes somewhere else, the wash goes somewhere else, it doesn't matter, it's not a big deal. It'll leave all kinds of nasty tide marks, doesn't matter, because we're going to go back over that and paint the skin in a little while. Just keep moving the paint around, make sure there's no big puddles, but also that you haven't missed any low-lying areas in the fur that are still showing light gray or black through whatever color was your last priming color. Same thing on the tail. We'll start at the top, slowly work the brush along, letting the paint sink in. Going to do the same thing on the backs of the arms now. Work my way along. And this wash of purple is really going to dry dark. The low spots are going to look very dark. This purple also tends to look a little bit oily in a wash when it dries, which is going to give a nice kind of look to the fur. I think it does anyway. Okay, so now we need to allow some time for that to dry. Just do another double check for pooling. Like these, the backs of these ankles, that's a place that the purple is going to pool. Just lift a little bit of that excess out of there. Have a quick look around for anywhere else that it might be pooling. I'm not really concerned about it pooling in the sense of what it's going to look like when it dries. Mostly just from the perspective that it's going to take a long time for a pool of paint to dry. And we don't want to be spending a long time just sitting watching paint dry. There's nothing wrong with watching paint dry, but that's not what we're about today. Okay. Here we go. So what else can I do while I'm waiting for that to dry? I could do... Oh, look at that. You get a nice drop of paint on the base. See the purple got in there? I made a nice, perfect tide mark. See that dark line? That's a classic tide mark or coffee stain, where the paint dried around the edge first, and the paint was less concentrated in the center where the water dried up, and it leaves that little mark. That nightshade purple is really good for being able to see those marks if you want them. Most people do not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little bit more of this nightshade purple, and I'm going to put that over the whole base. It doesn't have to be like perfectly in the crevices or anything like that. You can leave splotches all over the place if you want to, because the tide marks and that irregularity that they create is going to look natural on a stained, rotten dungeon floor, where who knows what kind of various fluids have been dropped on that floor over the course of the dungeon's existence. Maybe it's troll blood. And I'm going to do it now. You guys are going to hate me for this, but nobody knows the trolls this Gnoll scene. Sorry, couldn't resist it. I sing along. Nobody knows. All right. Still wet. We still got to wait a little bit longer for that to dry. If you had a hairdryer, this would be a good time to use it. But don't really need to do that. Just give it a little bit more time. We're not in a super hurry. I mean, it doesn't take very long to paint. So what else could I do as we're waiting for that to dry? Let's see. Well, I suppose I could do the metal on the axis if we've got time to do that. So just grab whatever. It doesn't really matter what silver paint you use. It doesn't need to be anything special. Honed steel is a good one. Blackened steel. Don't want anything really dark like gunmetal or anything like that, but just some sort of darker metal color. And then we'll grab a synthetic brush. I was going to say a non-natural bristle brush, so it's synthetic brush to paint the metal. I prefer not to use the metallic paints with my bristle brushes. It's just hard to clean out of them. You're also going to notice that the metallic paint on the wet palette doesn't last very long. It tends to get quite gooey and falls apart a bit as the water mixes with it. But if you use it pretty much right away, it'll be okay. You just don't want to leave it sitting there for a long time. So what I'm going to paint with this dark silver paint, just the metal bits that are the heads of these two axes. The rest of it's going to be wood. I haven't seen any other accoutrements. Oh, he's got a dagger on his ankle. We can paint the dagger hilt and the pommel this color as well. Make sure you get the space in between those little bits of leather that are holding the heads on the axes. This guy's pretty barbaric. I would have expected him to have like flint axes or stone axes or something. I suppose these are axes. The axe heads have been stolen from dwarves or gnomes or somebody in the dungeon. Probably dwarves. They look pretty big. And gnolls are typically considered to be kind of barbaric, and they steal other people's equipment rather than making their own. A little bit of a plastic hanging off the tip of that axe I'm going to get rid of. It's nice. There's no music blasting today. Really good. An occasional ambulance going by. No big deal. Relatively quiet today, which is nice. Alright, so we'll get this axe head finished. And I can see that my wash, the purple wash on the fur is mostly dry now. So once we're done with this metallic paint, we should be able to go back and do the dry brushing with the brown over top. So I think I will do the hilt of this dagger. That is definitely going to get hit when we do the dry brushing, but we'll just fix it later, and we'll do the tip or the pommel of the dagger as well. Looks like it's got a bit of either a wooden or leather handle. Those are definitely going to get hit by dry brushing, but that's the way it goes. Oh, he's got some sort of triangle thing on his chest as well. Might have to go back and do that metal later. Maybe it's a piece of bone, a piece of stone, maybe a piece of jade or something. Maybe that'll be his flash of color, his little flash of spirit on his uniform. All right, so for a dry brush, you can use pretty much anything you want. A beat-up brush. I'm going to use this beat-up makeup brush. What you don't want to use is your good brushes to do dry brushing. You damage the center bristle, and once that smashes out, they're not so good for painting fine details anymore. So just going to use this beat-up old dry brush or makeup brush. The color I'm going to dry brush on, I'm going to use the blackened brown, not blackened brown, the intense brown. And I'm going to get some of that on the brush. And right here in the wet palette, I'm going to work it into the bristles. Get the brush really well loaded up with paint. And then on my paper towel, I'm going to wipe most of that off. Now, I'm just going to show you my paper towel here for a second. The center of the paper towel is quite wet. Okay. If you just take this now and you rub it on a piece of paper towel, it's going to dry it right out again. And you want it to be a little bit soft, right? So I'm going to wipe it on the paper towel here, okay, which is going to suck most of the paint off of it, but it's going to stay damp. You can see if I dry brush with that on the paper towel on this other side over here, it leaves a little bit of a brown texture, and that's what I'm looking for. So just going to load it up again, since I just wiped it all off in the paper towel. I'll load the brush up again. Get rid of the excess on the paper towel. And you can, I would test this on a piece of, another piece of, like a piece of a mini or something. If you've got a base or something lying around, Just kind of see how much paint is going to come off of that. Yep, let's go back to the view of the Mini. That's what we want. See that brown on there? That's what I want. Just a little bit of color to come off the base, off the brush onto the texture. Okay, that's about what I'm looking for. And then I'm going to go back to the Mini. And my light is coming from this way, coming from that way. So I'm going to dry brush from that direction down. That's going to catch the raised surfaces facing towards the light with my dry brushing. I'm just going to do that very, very lightly and in that one direction. Just want to catch those raised surfaces of the fur. Now this is going to get on everything, right? It's going to hit everything surrounding the fur. It's going to hit his ears. It's going to hit the accoutrements on his chest. It's going to hit everywhere, and that's why we're doing this first. Dry brushing is a fine technique for, you know, just a little bit of rough work to catch detail, especially on something which is textured. But overall, it is a pretty messy technique, and it does tend to get everywhere, especially when you're just starting out. So actually, when I do beginner classes, I tend to avoid teaching dry brushing at the start and get people to do layering instead when they start painting, because layering is going to teach you brush control. And then when you go to do dry brushing, you'll have enough control to avoid making a mess. And then dry brushing becomes part of your toolbox, the same way as your layering will be in your toolbox. But going the other way is not quite as easy. If all you know how to do is dry brush, and you do that for years and years and years, you're developing a little bit of brush control, but not much. And then you go and try to do layering, and it doesn't work as well because you haven't got the brush control you need yet. And that can be very frustrating, especially for experienced painters who are experienced with that one technique but don't have layering in their arsenal yet. So I always recommend learning layering first. I know a lot of people also recommend learning wet blending as early on as possible, and I agree with that. But that can be kind of intimidating for people. So, alright, so we've done a bit of dry brushing on this fur. Texture is just... Are you seeing power flickers? That's not good. Just in case we lose power, so we don't lose the recording. Okay. Now, fur on the back of the arms the same way. Just casting the raised fur. Tail. Now, depending on the texture, you know, what I said, the idea earlier about going away from the light source is the direction your dry brushing can work. But some areas you may have to like do a circular motion to be able to hit it. You might have to do brush strokes up from below to get to the area. We want to make sure we do not put so much paint on there that we can't see the original black and brown, or that we can't see, or especially that we don't fill in the purple. We want to be sure that we can see that right to the end. Don't want to fill that in. Okay, that's probably enough dry brushing on this guy, just enough to catch the raised areas. Okay. And yeah, that's going to do it, I think. Okay, so going to clean off the dry brush, put it to the side, and get back into it with a regular old size 1 round brush. So that's what I'm going to use now to do. Oh, no, I want a little bit bigger brush. I'm going to base coat the skin tone now. Go back to my size 2. So the Palomino Gold and Ochre Yellow is what we're going to use for the skin tone. So I am going to think I'm going to start with the Palomino, no, what's this color called? Chestnut Gold. Chestnut Gold is going to be my first color painted over all the skin because it's a nice dark color, and then I might add some intense brown to it to make a shadow color. But for now, so what I want to do is make sure I don't put this over anything that's already been painted with the black and brown and dry brush. So like this area in his shoulder, my brush strokes are going to come down and away from the areas that are already painted so that I don't accidentally put this color on top of things I've already painted. Now one of the ways to tie it all together at the end is we could do a little bit of dry brushing with Golden Blonde or Palomino Gold as our lightest color on the figure, and that will sort of make it look like everything is catching the same light source. But we can make that decision later. For now, I'm just going to worry about getting this darker yellow ochre color on and not wrecking the careful bit of dry brushing I already did. We'll probably have to do 2 coats of this color. It is a very translucent color. What I don't want to do is make puddles of it though. So just work on an area, give it a thin coat. And by thin coat, I mean just work the paint, spread it out thinly, as opposed to putting on a thinned layer. Okay, I haven't added water or anything to this paint yet. Just working the paint to make it go on in a thin coat. And that way we don't fill in all the nice details, but we still get a nice color. So working my way around this right arm, there's a little bit of skin showing up under his the fur on the back of the shoulder. Make sure we get his elbow, the back of his elbow. But then with the fur on the arm there, my brush strokes, I'm going to start close to the fur but then pull away from it with the brush. And it might look a little bit irregular, and that's okay. It doesn't need to be perfectly smooth where it meets the fur. And that can be like just a representation of the shadow, the irregular rough edge where the fur meets the skin. And then we want to do in between those 2 wristbands because the color of his skin will be visible there. And then we'll do the right hand same way. Bit frustrating. It took me forever to get this size 2 brush broken in, and it's already lost its tip. I must have been very hard on it one day. Oh, I thought that was part of his skin. It's a piece of bone. Okay. So we'll keep working our way around. Let's do his left arm now. In the same way, look for the edge of the fur and pull the brush strokes away from the edge of the fur. And try to avoid creating a flood as much as possible. Probably should have shaken up this paint a bit more. It feels like it's a bit thin and not well mixed. It's working well enough for today, but always worth spending a bit of extra time mixing your paints. stirring them or shaking them before putting them on the palette. The Reaper paints have really good coverage for the most part. If I had shaken those better, I would probably be able to get away with only doing one coat at this point. Okay, missed a spot on the right forearm. Okay, let's work our way down the right leg now. Oh, no, we missed a spot on the back of his left arm. You see it in there. Get that now. And then his whole back I've missed. So do the back the same way. It's a bit awkward, but try to keep the brush strokes moving away from the fur that's already painted.
Remember Mr. McGinnis?
So we got a bunch of additional people who've joined in. If you have any questions, just go ahead and ask. I'm more than happy to take questions and chat. If you're painting along, you can always join us on the Discord as well, and get feedback on your figure as you paint.
Pardon?
Did you make it?
I wish I had. Sorry, Geoff. This week,
Two.
one for you, one for him.
See.
They were sizable. I think they're from Mr. Sobeys, I'm not sure.
Very
But
good.
they have oatmeal.
That's right. I had some for breakfast. That was lovely.
Yeah, so this is chestnut gold that I'm using. And we are going to make a shade with this color as well. We're going to mix some intense brown and some nightshade purple into it to make it darker. And that will be our shadow color for the main skin tone.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll do some highlighting with palomino gold and those other colors as well.
She had a really good neurologist who retired.
Okay, so I'm gonna paint the ears now the same color and do the same thing. Just avoid getting the fur by having your brush strokes pull out and away from the fur. Do that on both sides, front and back of the ear. And do a little bit, I think, on the sides of his muzzle. Picture him a little bit like a lion, like the skin on the main part of his face is going to be yellow. But then the mane and the fur around the periphery is going to be black. Dark brown, anyway. All right. There we go. So now we're going to make a shadow color. Going to grab some chestnut gold. Move that off to the side here. Going to get a little bit of the intense brown. And that's what we were using to do the dry brushing on the fur. So that changes the color a little bit, and I'm going to put just the tiniest drop. Nightshade purple in there. It's a very strong color to darken that down. So you have a big effect on that. And that's going to be my shadow color. So to paint that in, I'm going to switch to a smaller brush now. In fact, I'm going to switch to a size 0. And we're going to paint that into the shadows. A little bit of... I'm going to put a little bit of flow improver in there just to slow down the drying time. Okay, so shadows. You see a little arrow there? That's our light direction. So we're going to paint this shadow color in anywhere where the light wouldn't hit directly. So as I look at this arm, the inside of that arm is going to be darker. The underside of that bicep, between that bicep and his chest, those are going to be in the shadow, so we're going to get this shadow color. I'm going to put a little bit of this in between each muscle group on his chest, just to make him look a little bit more ripped. He's a very pronounced muscle relief. So basically just outlining each muscle group in this color. Until I get into the shadow side in there between his right arm and his right chest. And most of that area is going to get painted this darker color. I want to darken that down quite a bit because the light's not going to hit that directly. Might get some bounce light, but whereas his arm is casting a shadow across it, it's not going to be very much. So the light is going to catch the forearm, but it's not going to get the inside of the bicep in there, or the arm right up alongside his hip. So we paint the bottom of that the shadow color. Then we'll flip him around to the other side. Same idea. All of this arm is going to be in shadow. So we're going to put quite a bit of this color on this side. Definitely want to get the back of his hands, the back of that bicep. Lots of this color in there to make him darker in the shadows. Okay. Then on his hand, where the hand is touching the wood, I want to make sure we get this color in there. Between the hand and or the thumb and the wood on the top. And then each of the fingers needs this color in between and outlining the fingers as well. Make it look really dark. So this slow process of adding the shadows in specific places, this takes longer than just adding highlights. This is why a lot of people will start with a darker color and work their way up from darker colors, just working their way up to lighter colors, rather than learning to manually place the shadows in the low areas where the light's not going to hit. And it's just a matter of preference for the most part. But it's also a worthwhile skill to learn, to think about where's the light going to hit, where's the light not going to hit, and anywhere that there's a shadow, like on the back of this arm in here, we manually add the shadow in. And when you start doing more advanced painting, this is where you would use skills like two-brush blending and that sort of thing to push the paint into the shadows, to darken the shadows a lot. Okay, so that's his chest. Those two arms have got the shadows. So now we need to do the ears. So we're going to do a little bit on the inside of the ear. Put a little bit along the muzzle and below the eye. The light's coming this way though, so we leave the top of the eyelid, top of the nose there dark. But this ear, we're going to paint the inside of that ear right there. Shadowed. Right there is a shadow. And then we're going to paint the top of the ear is going to get light up there. But underneath here it's not. So we'll use our brush strokes and we'll pull this darker paint away from the light down towards the shadow to put a shadow on the ear. And then we'll do the same thing on the other side, but we'll put more of the shadow color on the inside of the ear. Paint the whole outside of the ear. We'll leave just the top of the ear where the light's going to catch coming this way. And then paint the back of the ear the darker color. Around his eye on this side, around his muzzle on this side is all going to be the shadow color, because the light's not going to hit it directly. There we go. A little bit of shadow added in there, giving it a little bit more muscle definition. Now, if you look at the difference between the muscles on his chest and the muscles on his legs now, the muscles on his chest are better defined than the ones down below. And that's because of that first layer of shadow that we've added in. And we do the same thing now on his legs. So we've got a little bit of a shadow where his bag is going to be casting a shadow on his leg. And then the inside of his leg. So we're looking at his left leg now. There's our light direction. Right there. Going that way. So that leg, the inside of that leg, all along is going to be in shadow. So all along there. And then under here, the light's not going to hit that directly. So we're going to paint the shadow on there as well. But just because it's in shadow doesn't mean that you don't have to highlight it. So we're going to darken it down right now. But when we go back to do the first layer of highlighting, some of that highlighting is going to go on raised areas in the shadows. Because right now we're working with fairly dark colors. We're going to go much, much lighter on the highlights on the front of the figure. So some of these colors that are going into the shadow right now, what I'm trying to say is the first highlight color we're going to put over the skin really is more of a shadow color. So we can highlight the shadows with that color and it won't look out of place. And it'll give more definition to the shapes. So a little bit of shadow around the knee. This side of the knee is mostly in shadow. The light's going to catch this side of his leg. So the back side of the leg is going to get this shadow color down underneath the muscle. And then in this zone, in by the hilt of the axe, in there, we'll push this color in there too. And then down onto his foot as well. And then right down in between all the toes. There we go. That's our first layer of shadow. Pretty happy with that. And now we're going to take some palomino gold and some chestnut gold. And we're going to make a mixture. So add a bit of palomino gold into that just to lighten it up a little bit. And this is the first highlight color. So this color is going to be used to highlight in all the shadows as well as on the main highlights. So on the side where the light is hitting, we're going to create large highlights with this color. On the side where the light is not hitting, we're going to make small highlights with this color. So let's start by doing his chest. The light is coming this way. So these areas here are going to have quite a light highlight, and it's going to be quite large. So facing directly towards the light, large highlight. And don't completely cover over the shadows that we just put in. You want to keep those shadows, and bear in mind that we're going to go much, much lighter on the side of this guy facing towards the light. So there's the bicep facing the light. And we'll keep going. This forearm. Most of that forearm is facing directly towards the light. Nice big highlight. Back of the shoulder. These are all facing, the light is right there. So all of these are facing the light and they get large highlights. Always being careful not to get this onto the fur if we can. If we do make a mistake and get it on the fur, well, when we get to that final step where we try to integrate everything by giving it the same highlight color, his skin and his fur, I mean, that might conceal some of those mistakes a little bit. But we do want to be careful not to get this paint on things that are already finished. fingers. Each of these tendons on the back of the hand facing the light. Okay, now the rest of his chest. So we've got all these different muscle groups in here. And we want to put a separate highlight on each of them. And that highlight should be pretty big. Each of those ribs. But don't completely cover over the shadow from the previous step. I want to keep a little bit of that shadow visible. Still working with mostly unthinned paint. There's just a touch of flow improver in there to slow down the drying time, but it's not thinned very much. Okay, now as we move around the body towards here, these muscles are more in the shadow, so the highlights are going to be still facing towards the light side, but a little bit smaller. And then as you get further around, this part of his chest, the light's just going to come across the top a little bit. So we want to give a small highlight on the top. Not too much, just a small highlight. And then the same thing. This bicep is in the shadow from this side of the body. Okay, so just a small highlight on the bicep. And in the shadow back there. But this part of the arm is in the light, so it's going to get a nice big highlight. So a nice big highlight on this side, which is facing the light. Same thing with his hand, is facing the light. Give that a nice big highlight. There we go. And now we got to work the back of the body. So, well, the focus is really off, isn't it? There we go. So light coming this way, big highlight on the back of the arm there. Back of the hand. But down here, not much light is going to hit. Might be a little bit of bounce light. So we'll do a small highlight facing towards the shadow side, which is the highlight that's going to come from the light bouncing off of the rest of his body. Same thing in this part of his torso. It's in the shadow, but there's going to be a little bit of bounce light that's going to get there. So we'll just highlight that a little bit, just to make the shapes visible in the shadow. The same thing back here. We just need a little bit of a shadow there. Sorry, a highlight. A little bit of a highlight there. Same on the back of the shoulder. Back of the elbow. And on this forearm muscle. Little tendon there. What is that? Little highlights. And then the back of his hand. Just enough that those shapes are going to be visible on the shadow side. So now, since we're on this side, let's do the back of the right leg just a little bit. And then that tendon that runs on the side of his foot, get a little highlight on that. Not too much though. We're going to highlight that a lot more strongly from the front. And then the back of that ankle. A little bit of a highlight where the light's bouncing off the ground. Not too much. But now we're going to highlight that leg quite strongly from the front. This is his left leg. So the light, you can see the arrow right there. So these toes are all going to get quite a strong highlight. This part of his leg is facing the ground, so we're not going to do too much there, but this part of his leg is going to catch the light for sure. So nice big highlights on those muscles, on these main quad muscles on the upper part of his leg. Top of the knee. But I'm not going to reach into the shadow under there too much. Just enough to mark those shapes with a small highlight where the bounce light would get them just a little bit. And for many people, this bounce light highlight is probably already too bright. But really just thinking about the idea of it right now more than trying to make it absolutely perfect. Okay, so now we've got to do his right leg. And the right leg, the light's coming this way. It's going to catch it quite a lot on this side, so big highlight there. Front half of this muscle is going to be really brightly lit. It's basically got like a flat side facing the light, so that's going to get a big highlight. Just the top of the knee and the top of the calf muscle there by his leg. Those are going to catch that color. And then in here, the back of this muscle just needs a little highlight. And the back of that one, just a little highlight. Or the bounce light might get them, okay? And then the next step is going to be that foot, which is again going to catch the light pretty directly. So nice, big, strong highlight on that part of the feet. Okay, and it's looking pretty well defined there now. And now we need to make that much, much lighter. So we're going to grab a big dollop of yellow or palomino gold and add it to our previous mix. This is going to be a much, much lighter color. Probably a little bit too light. If you have lots of time to do this, you can do steps as small as you like, right? And then take your time to do it. Well, I forgot to do his face. We'll have to go back and do his face. So now this color, I'm not going to use this on the shadow side at all. This is only going to be on the highlight side. So anywhere that the light is going to hit directly. So you see the light coming this way. It says it's going to catch the forearm down here. Okay, but it's not going to catch the bicep. So essentially this is the light that's bouncing and catching the bottom of the bicep to make that highlight. And then we do the hand the same way. And we want this highlight is still going to be quite large. We just don't want to completely not overdo. We don't want to make this bigger than the previous highlight. just a sliver of the last highlight should show outside of this color. Same thing up here on his chest. The light's going to go across his chest and catch this way. So a small highlight right in the center of that previous one, making sure we don't completely cover it over. There we go. Same thing working his way down now. Each of these muscle groups, so the dividing line's around there, right around the center of his muscles. Okay? Everything to that side of the line is now going to get a small highlight facing towards the light. Because this light is not catching it directly, it's just catching it obliquely. So in the example of these abdominal muscles, I'm going to keep about half of the previous highlight color and make this cover about half of it. So these highlights are quite small by comparison to the last ones we did. So that's on the side of the body away from, not away from light, but at the transition zone, okay? Because our light's coming this way. But now the muscles on this side, these are going to get very large highlights that will almost completely obscure the previous highlight layer. Not completely, but almost. So each of these separate muscle groups and his ribs lines there, all of these things are getting their own highlights, and they're going to be large highlights covering most. So maybe 5% of the previous highlight color is still showing. So this side of the body is going to be a lot lighter than that transition zone and the back. We're also going to come back and do a couple more lighter highlights in this zone, which is really going to pop them up. So the chest muscle here is going to be mostly highlighted with this color. Just a little bit of it left in the shadow. Most of that, whatever that muscle's called, deltoid, I think. Definitely lighter on this side than the other. To the top of that bicep. Huge highlight on the bicep. And then the same thing. A little bit of muscle showing right there. It's going to get a little highlight, a little bit of tendon. Not that one in there. The one underneath there we're not going to highlight with this color because of the light angle, but this one up here almost entirely highlight. Just the smallest amount of that previous layer. Not covered over. Back of the hand, same thing. And we're just going to turn now and do the rest of this arm. The top of that needs this highlight color. Right, where is it? Back of the muscles. No, front of the muscles, facing the highlight side. Nice bright highlight there. And the hand, we want to do the forearm, tricep, right, back of the hand. Okay, now this leg. This big quad here gets a great big highlight, covering over like 95% of the previous highlight color. Only going to really leave it showing in the transition zone out here Okay, right out there. The rest of it is pretty much going to get covered over. Really light towards the highlight side. Can keep doing this down the back of the leg. Those muscles there. Side of the knee. Now this color is starting to look a little chalky, and that's normal. And we would gonna glaze at the end to cover that up. I thought at first that this was cloth, but I think it's actually just the skin of his ankle rolled up into like a rough little shape. So we'll paint that the skin color as a highlight, and then working our way down. Keep going on his foot as well. Okay. Looking pretty dramatic. I like it. All right, and where else do we need this color for? Don't think we did the. No, we did the forearm. We haven't done that leg yet. So this same color. Look at our light direction again. There's the light. It's going to come across and just catch this side of the leg. Just this side. So nice big highlights on there. Side of the foot. Now we're going to give this guy an almost like Frank Frazetta-like brightness to his color, right? So we're going to go another whole layer lighter on that. So what I'm going to do is grab some buckskin pale and add that into the mix as well. Much lighter color. Just a little bit. But it really lightens things up. So now this color, we're going to apply it the same as we did the last one, and it's going to cover most of the previous highlight and make it look quite light. So this headband magnifier, thanks for the question, by the way, Tea Light Trees. This particular one came from Michael's. I'm in Canada, so I get it at my local Michael's. But I do know the one in the US carries it as well. And you find it in the beading section. What I like about it, it's got 4 different magnifying lenses it comes with. In Canada, it's about $25. So in the US, I think it's about 15 or 18. But when you get it with a coupon, it's $12, $15, something like that. What I like about it is it's really, really lightweight. And, oh, okay. You're in the same place as I am. The light goes through from the top, right? So it really, it doesn't cast a shadow across your work. Yeah, I get mine at the Michael's in Dartmouth Crossing. And buy them with a coupon. Right on. So are you somebody that I know then that's been here in the studio before? Okay, so this color is going to cover 90% of the previous one. Oh, okay, right on. I remember totally now. Very cool. All right, so this color is going to cover about 90% of the previous highlight because we're on the light side of the figure. We still want the highlights to be quite light. As I said before, we did highlighting in the shadow side, just enough to pick out the features, pick out the shapes. But we don't really want to have it too bright. On this side, though, we want to go really, really light and have a really strong contrast, a lot of drama. So this color is going to cover about 90% of the previous highlight. So in the area where we did a small highlight previously, that transition zone, this is going to cover about 50% of the previous highlight. And really just closest to the light source. Okay. This one, on the other side of the line, across that line, we're going to cover most of the previous highlight. Not all of it, most of it, about 90%. You may find that the paint is a bit on the thick side. So add a little bit of a flow improver on it just to make it easier to work with. In the sense that we have a little bit more time to work with it and smooth it out. We still don't want it to be really thin because then it'll just flow down in all these spaces in between the muscles, and that's not what we want to do. We're going to do a glaze layer in a moment, and that will flow into that zone, but for now we don't want to do that. So really just hitting the tops of the muscles and covering about 90% of the previous highlight color. But only on this side where the light is hitting directly. This large chest model, we're going to cover most of that. There we go. And then down here on the bicep. Same deal. Forearm. Same idea, covering most of that previous highlight color. I'm going to be really light towards our light source, really obvious light source. Back of the hand, same way. I'm liking it. Now, I'm going to do the same thing down his leg. Cover these big muscles. Make sure we preserve some of the previous layer in this transition zone here at the front of the leg. Very dramatic looking. And then it'll fold the skin. Tops of the feet. Okay, the other side. The light goes through, and we just a little bit on the forearm over there. The thumb. 4 fingers. the light would go past. There we go. And then the right leg. Same idea, but not quite as bright as the left leg. So we're only going to cover about 50% of the previous color on the other leg. Pretty happy with that. So if you look at him through the light side, he's really, really brightly lit. If you look at him on the shadow side, he's quite dark. And that's what we want, is that contrast between the two. Now, we need to go back and do his face that I forgot to do earlier. So we already did the shadow color on the face. So a little bit of the 50-50 mix of chestnut gold and palomino gold. And we're going to do, really this is all focusing on the light side. So the top of that ear, facing the light. That little lip of the ear there that faces the light. A little bit where that texture on the inside of his ear would catch the light. And then this whole edge of the ear, and I'm going to send that right out to that eyebrow. Going to highlight that whole eyebrow, side of the nose, under the eye, and this whole bit of jowl here is going to get lit up by the light coming from that side. There we go. Now we want to do the same thing to the top of the ear on the other side. The light's going to go past and catch the top of the ear over there. I know that's hard to see. Yeah, there's really no angle I can get out to get that with the camera. Just have to realize I'm getting in there with this color. Okay, so there's the first step of highlighting the face. And now I'm going to do the second color. So this is more palomino gold into the same mix. It's mostly palomino gold. I'll do the same thing again, just a little bit less. So right across his muzzle, his cheeks, under his eye, his brow, over the ear, but not all the way to the bottom of the ear, not all the way down. And then just the bit of the ear which is going to catch the light the brightest there. Back of the ear, same thing, just a little bit at the top. And the ear on the opposite side just gets a touch. Just a touch. Good enough. Okay, and there we go. So then we're into our mostly, it's buckskin pale with palomino gold is what we're going to do next. It's the same principle, right? We're just going to cover most of the previous highlight, making sure we don't like lose detail. So over the brow, little wrinkles, top of the cheekbone, side of the muzzle, by the side of his nose, the lip, the strong muscle in his face that comes across the cheek there, and then the top of the ear, and the bottom of the ear there, and then the other side of the ear on the other side in there is just going to catch that light a little bit. There we go. So now we've got our dramatic looking Howl at the Sky guy. doesn't look as light as it does down there, so we'll do another coat of that same color. Bring it up. All the same idea, preserve all the detail. There we go. Now, the question we want to ask ourselves is this light enough? It's pretty light. I think I want to go a little bit lighter. I'm going to grab some straight Palomino gold. No, buckskin pale. Put a little bit of flow improver in it. And where I want the brightest highlights to be, I'm going to do just a bit of this buckskin pale on those muscles. So I'm not going to do this all down along his feet. I'm going to focus this towards where the central focal point is going to be right here around the middle of his body. So I'm going to do this on his ear, his cheek, his brow. Pick out the details on his muzzle. And then we're going to pick out this shoulder muscle. Make this a highlight point. Take that right down onto the top of the bicep. And this needs to come all the way across his chest on that long, strong muscle. There we go. The camera's starting to freak out now because it's so bright. Now, something we need to consider is that there's flat areas in between those muscle groups, and those flat areas are facing directly towards the light source, which means the light would hit them directly. They're not going to be shadows, and right now we've got them painted as our darkest shadow color. So there's our light source. Let's look at those areas directly through the light. So what we're looking at is there's the light. So all these areas in here, okay, where the light coming from that angle is going to get down into those areas and lighten them up. What we need to do is glaze over that with a lighter color. And that's going to be, so I'm going to go down to my 50-50 mix of Palomino gold and chestnut gold. So significantly lighter color. And I'm going to make a glaze of that color. How do I do that? I get some of that paint and I add water into the mix. I'm going to thin it quite a lot. And I'm going to put this thinned paint into that zone where it's too shadowed and it should be lighter. And what's going to happen is as this dries, it's going to darken up a little bit, but it's going to make those shadow areas lighter. And it's going to look less stark and a little bit more natural. So where I'm going to start right here in the armpit, and I'm going to glaze this in the edge of the highlight from that last color we did. And then I'm going to pull it from that into the shadow, and I'll let this dry over the shadow to lighten it. And And the net result is going to be more color in the shadows. And the shadows are going to be lighter. Now, in some spots, I might accidentally let this dry on top of the highlight. If that happens, we just reapply the highlight and bring it back. But it's lightening. So there's the shadow zone. That is now darker than it is in there. And we could do this a couple of times depending on how light we want to make it. But it is facing pretty much directly towards the light. So it definitely shouldn't be as dark as our darkest shadow color. Put some in the shadows in there. Do that a couple more times to lighten it. Okay, that's what we want. It's all darker in there now. Sorry, lighter in there now. And I'm now going to go and I can use that same glaze over everything. Okay, over everything. Now, why am I doing that? To smooth out all that highlighting. And to darken down our brightest highlights just a little bit. So if I just glaze the same cover over all of this now, these highlights are going to show through that and still be pretty bright, right? Tea light trees. How long does it typically take me to paint a medium-sized mini? It really depends on the quality level that I'm going for, right? So this mini is going to be mostly painted in an hour. So I started at 1 o'clock. It'd be not 1 o'clock. I started at 3. I've been painting it for almost 2 hours now. It'll basically be done in another hour. So that's about 3 hours of this. But that's painting really slowly and doing it at a very kind of basic level, right? If I'm doing a lot of detail, it'll take 2, 3, 4 times as long. Or if I'm just painting it for a D&D game, it might take 20 minutes, half an hour, something. It really depends on what quality level I'm trying to get to. And that's going to be totally different for everybody, right? Some people, it's just a question of experience, right? And some things I do very fast, other things I do quite slowly. And other people do different things at different speeds. All right, so this color is going to go everything. And what I want to do is I'm going to pull across these highlights with a glaze color. That's about how thick the paint is. Okay, it's not very thick. And I'm going to move it across the highlights, and I'm going to park it back in the shadow that I was just working on. So I'll start right up here by the fur, and I pull this color all the way across, moving it, moving it, moving it, moving it, pushing it, pushing it. So I left a thin film behind, but then push it right across that muscle and leave the final dot at the shadow. And as that darkens and dries, it's going to smooth out all of the highlighting that we did. I do the same thing on the other chest muscle. Pull across and then park that off the edge of it in the shadow side. Sorry, it's in the shadows on the highlight side. I hope that makes sense. Start down here, do the same thing. Pull all the way across those highlights. And then just leave that little drop of paint back in the shadows on the lit side of the mini. The same thing on all these muscles. So it's going to make him a lot more colorful, but it's also going to make some of that chalkiness go away, and it's going to make the blending look a little smoother. And this is one of the reasons it's important to get used to. Thanks very much, Tea Light Trees. I appreciate you saying that. This is one of the things that's going to make we get used to painting really, really light highlights so that you can go lighter than you need, so that when you come back and glaze, and the glazes darken up those highlights, they don't disappear completely. They show through your glazes, and you keep that contrast that you built to show the light direction. Have you folks been doing any painting lately, tea light trees? Oh, right on. What kind of things have you been working on the last few days? And I agree, it was great weather for learning to paint minis. All right. Now I can do the same thing on the face. And that's a little bit more difficult because all that nice fur that we've got going on there. So I'm just going to be using really not much volume of paint. I want to avoid flooding anything if I can. Back of those ears. Side of the nose. Well, good. Right on. The only way to improve is to spend time with your brush touching the minis. There's no other way. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. I think I'm going to leave that like that for now. And then we're going to paint a bunch of details, and then we're going to come back and add some hyena spots and maybe lighten up the fur a little bit. So it's time to blitz a whole bunch of leather, the tongue, the wooden handles, all that kind of stuff. So away we go with that. So I'm grabbing the russet brown that I put on the palette earlier. This is the base coat for all my leather. And I'm using my small brush still. And I'm going to paint all the leather this color. Now I noticed that there's quite a lot of bone. We're going to do the bone separately. So I'm going to start by working on this leather loincloth thing he's got going on. And just tea light trees, just so you know, all the minis from these paint-alongs, we have them here in the studio. And these videos also roll over onto YouTube. And they're designed so that you can get the same mini. You don't have to get the same paints, but similar paints is helpful. And then you basically paint the same mini with the same colors, and it's a way to practice technique, and it can be a really good way to learn quickly. And where you're nearby, you're always welcome to drop in and show me what you've been doing and get a bit of feedback. And that's what we like doing, talking to people about miniature painting. In fact, that's the whole premise of these classes, is to give people an opportunity to see exactly what we do in real time with no fancy special effects editing or anything. And I do my best to talk through what I'm doing and why the whole way, so that people can learn a bit about different ideas in miniature painting. And there was another reason we were doing it this way. Oh, because of the Discord channel. And people can... I used to do these classes exactly like in this format in the studio. But by doing it this way, the people can participate on the Discord live and get live feedback, which some people have done. And then, you know, they can drop a photo on the Discord, and I give feedback right away as they're painting. And then the other way to do it is just follow along on YouTube, pause when you need to, take your time, and then you're always welcome to message me either through the Discord, or just message me through the Facebook page, or send me an email, info@hecatina.ca, and I'm always happy to answer questions for people, especially if they're working on one of the minis that we've done as a paint along. This is our, I want to say, 15th paint along. So there's 15 videos like this now. And my favorite thing about it is if somebody is chatting with me and asking questions as we go. So paint all the leather, every leather strap that I can find, the leather scabbard on this little dagger, every piece of leather on his body, all the little leather cords, the hilt of this, or the handle of this little dagger on his leg. All of these things are getting painted this russet brown color. And you might say to yourself, okay, well, that's going to make all the leather look the same, and it kind of does. And I'm okay with that, because the leather is not really my main emphasis. His fur and the hyena spots that I'm going to give him in a few minutes are really what I want the attention to be on. So I don't need the leather to look really special. But one thing you can do, if you do want the leather to look a little bit different, start it all the same color the way I'm doing it here. But then once you've highlighted all the leather, go back and glaze it with inks and use a different colored ink each time for each different piece of leather. And that'll make the leather look similar, but not all identical. And that can make it a little bit more visually interesting, a little bit less boring. There we go. I've missed some leather up on, there we go. Okay, so the leather on his wrists, on his arms. I'm going to treat these bands on his arms as though they're, I mean, they might be metal or some kind of other thing, but we're going to pretend that they're the leather for our purposes. Do them all. I'm painting this leather pretty fast, but I've got a pretty good quality brush with a nice point on it, so I have pretty good control over where the paint's landing. If you don't have as much control, just go slower and know that you've got the skin paint is still on your palette. So if you make a mistake, you can always go back and fix it later. Takes no time at all. Wrists. I think people may have been wondering, like I said, this mini's going to be done. It didn't look like he was very close to being done when I said it, but he's getting... There's a lot of leather on this guy, and that leather just is all going to get... basically going to disappear at this stage and be painted. Main thing right now is just to not rush. Now there is some leather on his... around his neck. And it might look like the two colors, the russet brown and the black and brown are the same color, but they're not. So we still want to go through and highlight the leather loops around his neck with this color. So they do stand out a little bit as a different color. And in some areas they go under the fur. Don't be tempted to paint over the fur with this. Just hit where the leather is actually showing. And because the color will be noticeably different when it dries. Just be a little cautious about that. Bit around his neck. And then I'm going to paint this weird triangle on his chest, this leather color for now. I might make it a different color later. For now, it's going to be a piece of leather. There we go. That's all of our leather. Nope, still missed some leather. Missed the other side of his hands. Get those done quick. There we go. Oh my gosh, what a lot of leather. Okay. That's not all the leather. Even still, we still got to do the other hatchet, or axe. So let's do that other axe. And then we can pretend all the leather is done. Not bad, not bad. Okay, so we're getting close to the stage where we need to do some washes on things. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put, I need to make a wood color. So for the wood, I think what we'll do, we'll make a fake sort of wood color. I'm going to grab some stone gray, which is what I used on the base. And I'm going to add a little bit of palomino gold, so it's going to be a yellowy gray. And then I'm going to add some what's this? Buckskin pale to the mix. And that's going to give me a light colored sort of off gray color. A little bit more yellow. Let's add some more yellow in that, lighten it up a bit. Close enough. That's going to be my basic wood color. So I'm going to paint that on the handles. So I'm going to get this handle in here. And we're going to put a very dark colored wash over all of this wood. And then come back and highlight it again. So this is just like a... You can think about this as slightly faded older wood color that we're putting on here now. And then we're going to darken it down and make it look kind of grimy. And then we're going to highlight it up again. We want to make sure we get the wood that sticks out at the top of the axe head as well, this color. Now you could make this really any color you want. I mean, the Gnoll could have made this out of a really old piece of wood. He could have cut it fresh yesterday and it's green wood that's not even a little bit faded. He's never swung this axe yet. It's brand new. Or it could be something he made himself. It's all blood-stained now. Or he painted it. Maybe he painted it with, you know, some mixture of blueberries and blood, or I don't know, whatever. It could be any color you want. It doesn't have to be a basic wood color. Okay, but this is what I'm going for this one today. You could also say that it was bone if you wanted to. We carved this out of the bone of a mastodon or something. All legitimate ideas in a fantasy setting. Heck, it could be magical ice. Who knows? Whatever you want. Why am I saying all that? Because somebody was trying to get in an argument with me about what color the wood would be on weapon handles. He was very insistent it should be a particular way, and it just doesn't have to be. No rules. No rules and practically no mistakes. Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks very much for asking questions. I appreciate it when people are chatting. And I hope we'll see you the next time around. We do this every week, so have a great day. Oh, have I drifted? Just a little bit. For anybody else who's out there and oh, power flickering again. For anybody else out there who's listening in, another great way to learn to paint is just to talk to other painters, which is what the Miniature Monthly Discord server is all about. People are welcome to go on there and ask questions, post photos of your stuff. To get access to all the channels, you need to be part of the Patreon. But there's a few free channels there. One of the free channels is hosting this painting class. But there's also a whole bunch of other channels on there just for chatting or whatever. And a really friendly group of people. It's a good painting community to be part of, and it doesn't cost anything to just be in those parts of the channel. And they have great instructors if you want to take some paid classes. Miniature Monthly's instructors are outstanding. Can't go wrong with them. All right, I need some pink. I'm going to grab some rosy skin, and this is going to be for his tongue. His tongue, which is lolling out of his head. So we're going to grab that. Like I said, this is going to go pretty quick once we get to a certain point. And it's nearly at that point. So a little bit of rosy skin, and I'm going to mix that with, let's use the russet brown or harvest brown, whatever it was called. I'm going to mix some of the pink with that. And this is going to be the base coat color for the tongue. So now that I've got that gross color, there's the pink. There's the mixture. Paint this on his tongue, which is kind of lolling out of his mouth. Probably slobbering as he howls at the moon or whatever it is that he wants to howl at. There we go, and you can paint his lips this color if you really want to as well, like he's a dog. I am going to come back momentarily and paint all of his teeth yellow. There we go. So there's his tongue, and now we're going to paint the lobes of the tongue, only the lobes of the tongue, this pink. So we'll thin it a little bit. I don't need much volume on the brush. And the tongue has like those two little lobes. See if you can get a better zoom in on that. There we go. Two little lobes. One there and one there. And we're going to paint them separately, give them a separate highlight each with rosy pink skin. There's one. There's the other one. And a little bit of a highlight on the tip of the tongue. There we go. The other place I want to use this color is going to be inside his ear. So let's grab that dark mix again. I'll put a little bit of the dark mix inside his ear, like the light's showing through the skin of his ear. It'll be the same on the other side, just a little bit. It's not going to be as light on the other side. There we go, a little bit of light showing through his inside of his ear. And then on the light side, but not the shadow side, we're going to put a little bit of pink, rosy skin in there as well as a little bit of a highlight. Sort of color that you see when your dopey dog is running around and its ear flips inside out. And we also need to put, we're going to paint his eyes this pink color too. I know that sounds crazy, but we're going to do it anyway. So there's his eye, and we're going to pretend he's looking off to his right. So I'm going to put a little bit of a dot at the back in the eye socket, just so it looks like he's looking the other way. I'll do the same on the other side of his body. Now doing tiny little dots like that, sometimes you're going to find that the paint won't flow and you want to thin it with water. You want to resist that temptation. Use something like a flow improver and just the tiniest amount so that the paint will flow better and it will dry more slowly. Give you time to work with it, but if you thin it too much, the paint is going to flood the eye socket, and that's not what we want. So if you look at him straight on, he's now looking, he's looking that way. It's a little bit more alive. Okay, where are we at? Where are we to? Bone color. We need some bone color. So for bone, I'm going to grab some purple, a whole bunch of stone gray, and then I'm going to add a whole bunch of buckskin pale into that mix. Make it quite light colored, but still kind of gross and gray. That's the base coat for the bone. More buckskin pale. More buckskin. There we go. That's what I want. And that's also going to be the base for his yellow teeth. So everything that's bone is going to get that color. So that's going to be these little bones on his little loincloth thing at the front are each going to get this color. So, loincloth bones. The bone at his waistband. Just realized this color looks very similar to the wood color, but it's a little bit different. We're going to treat it differently, and it'll look different when we're done. All right, where else is there bone? There's a whole bunch of bone on his head. So we're going to do each of these earrings as a separate piece of bone colored material. Two earrings on each ear. And at the moment they should be quite dark colored. So there's the earrings, and then his teeth, each of his teeth individually gets this color. Doesn't have very many teeth in the lower jaw, but he's got lots in the upper jaw. And we want them to be each painted separately. There we go. Now, nothing must be in the right focus today. It might be in focus, but my eyes are garbage. There we go. And then the next thing is all the little talons or teeth or whatever they are on his little necklace. Paint each of those separately, but don't like try to paint them right down to his body. Leave a little bit of that dark brown, because these all got coated when we did the hair. Leave some of the dark brown underneath so they look like they're a little bit raised off of his skin. It's like a built-in shadow effect. Okay. Is that all the bone? That's all the bone I can see. It's enough bone for me. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do, we need to do some dark colored washes. So we're going to put a purple wash over all the metal, over the steel. And then we're going to do a black and brown wash over everything else, all the leather. So let's do the steel first. We've already got the purple wash here on the palette. Might have to freshen it up a little bit. Okay, and that is just going to go over all the metal parts. And that's to dull down the silver, dull down the shininess. And then we can come back and highlight with the same metal color to give them a glint, make them shiny again. Or we can just rust them, put stains on them. They're going to look quite stained as a result of the way that this purple wash is going to dry. It's going to dry very patchy. And in fact, that's a good way to get like the base underneath a rust effect, is to do a splotchy wash of this sort of nightshade purple, a splotchy wash of the imperial purple, and do it a bunch of times, just not smooth like I'm sort of doing it here, but just like sort of, watch, I'll do it right here on this blade bit. Boom, 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 like that. And then just let it dry. And then do it again, and do it again, and do it again. And it'll end up being very patchy. And that makes a really interesting oily look underneath your rust effects. There we go. And the other steel we want to do is the sword hilt or dagger hilt at his leg. And the pommel. The pommel. Oh, I started putting the wrong color on the leather. Ah, well, I'll stop. So the blades are now done, and now we're going to do a wash over the everything else. So that brush is too big. I'm going to size 1, something like that. That'll do. And I'm going to make the wash of black and brown. I'm actually going to mix black and brown with a little daub of purple. And then I'm going to thin it with water. A little bit of flow improver. And this is going to go over all the leather. And the reason for this is to just darken it down a little bit so our highlighting that we're going to do in a minute looks better. And a lot of the leather has little features in it. And this is going to increase the definition of those features. Like this belt has a whole bunch of little shapes carved into it. And when this goes over that and dries, it's going to really make them easier to spot. So just be careful not to let this flow all over the skin. Because if it flows all over the skin, it's not going to look very good. It's going to be very patchy and hard to clean off. So just be a little bit careful not to do this over the skin. But we want to do this over all the bone. This is going to make all the bone materials look dirty. Maybe a little too thick. Let's thin that down further. So basically, it's been turn everything almost the same color as the leather. That's not what I want. I just wanted to define the leather a little bit. Okay, that's better. So just be a little judicious about it. You don't need a lot. Go slow. Try not to get it on the skin. If you do get it on the skin, what do? Well, this is where you would have that second brush ready to go. And as soon as you made a mistake, you grab the second brush, you put some water on your mistake and wipe it off again before it dries. It's a pretty useful technique, works pretty well. Sometimes you can't react fast enough though and it doesn't work. And if that happens, well, he's a gnoll, so he's going to be dirty anyway. He might have some... There, just did it right there. We'll clean that up. The second brush. And I want this color over all the wood as well. I need a little bit more of it. There we go. Decided that my wood on this guy is going to look kind of gross and grimy. Okay, there we go. It's all toned down now. And we'll let all that dry. And while that's drying, I'm going to do a little bit of work on the base. Now, we put that wash over the base. Remember, our light direction is coming from here. So I'm going to grab the stone gray, which is what I base coated it with before we put on the purple wash. And I'm going to start just lightly putting dots and dabs and dashes of the stone gray. But I'm going to be cognizant of where the light source is. The light source is on this edge of the base. So I'm going to really work on bringing the light out on the stones on that side, but I'm not going to put this, like there's going to be a drop shadow behind his leg back there. So I'm not going to paint that. I'm going to avoid that. So that zone right in there is going to stay in shadow. And I'm going to emphasize this lighting effect, this bit of stone colored light, or the stone which has the light hitting it is going to be lighter. So this is going to be lighter towards the light source. I'm not going to do so much of this towards the shadow side. And that's going to help increase the illusion of that there's light shining on him. That's something a lot of people tend to forget, is that the light source is going to affect the base as well. That's starting to help already with improving the overall look. So there's the light going across. Light starts there. So it's going to hit out here. But there'll be a shadow behind his leg there, but maybe not right behind him over there. This will get a little bit of light in it back here. Not too much though. You notice I'm not dry brushing. I'm being a little bit more deliberate about where I'm placing these colors, because dry brushing is not necessarily going to hit the right things and get the effect that I want. That's what I'm looking for. The base is distinctly lighter on this side than on the other side. Okay. Now we're going to highlight leather. So we've got that, what was that color called? Russet brown. We're going to mix a whole bunch of harvest brown into that. And this is going to be the first highlight color of our leather. And then into that we can add more harvest brown or a little bit of palomino gold or whatever it is to create a variety of leather colors. So the same leather color for now. I'm just going to pretty much do everything. All the leather straps. And this is only going to go on the highlight side, on the light side of the leather. I'm not worrying about doing this on the shadow side. I don't want these details to stand out all that much, but I don't want them to detract from the overall look of the lighting on the Mini. So yeah, just a little bit of highlighting on the light side of the figure. Help with that overall illusion that he's lit. Now, if you're a little bit more practiced at this, you can start adding a texture to the leather. You can make it look damaged. You can make it look stained and weather beaten and cracked. You can make it look like untanned hide if you wanted to. Sky's the limit. Just decide for yourself what the story is behind this guy. Has he stolen pieces of well-made leather, or has he just cobbled this together crudely from animals that he killed, or from the hides of dwarves that he scavenged off the battlefield where they got toasted by a dragon? Those are all going to be leathers with slightly different textures, and you can do them however you want. But for me right now, I'm just going to make them a little bit brown. Excuse me. I'm just going to take a break for a second and get a drink. We were working on leather, highlighting the leather. Let's get back to highlighting leathers. Fix the focus. keep going with the leather. I'm happy with this. He's looking pretty good. Okay, just a little bit of leather highlighting everywhere. I'm going to do some bone highlighting. You can decide if you want to do your own highlighting style on the all the metal. Add some special features on the base, some blood stains or whatever you feel like. You could also do a wood grain texture on those wooden handles if we want to. Let's see how I feel in about 5 minutes. And I have not forgotten that we're going to do some hyena spots on this guy as well. Because, you know, we're not ambitious or anything. Okay. A little bit more leather highlighting. Going to put some Palomino gold into that mix. A little bit more harvest brown. And that will be our next leather color. Okay, that's probably enough on leather for now. So now I'm going to go back to that gross gray bone color I made earlier. And we're going to redo that color on all the bone. So that's going to be the bone in his pants. This bone stuck through his belt. Don't paint the whole thing. You want to leave a little bit of that shadow from the wash that we put on it. We can do the bones on the front of his little trousery thing here. Same idea. Preserve the wash, the shadowing. There we go. All the ones up here on his necklace. His necklace of owlbear teeth. It's a little joke for you. His earrings. And what if I left out that's bone? Nothing. That appears to be bone. Okay. Didn't do his teeth. That's okay. We're going to just skip this color on the teeth because the teeth are so small. And now we're going to jump up to, we're going to take this yellow amber gold color. I'm going to put a whole bunch of that into the bone mix. And we're going to do all the highlights again, but smaller. And always keep in mind which way our light direction is coming from. That's the side of this bone that gets the highlight. Same thing down here. Highlight the top and the end of the bone. And I only do the end of the bone facing the light, not both ends. And then his necklace of teeth. So these earrings are already in the shadow. They don't need to be highlighted again. The back end of the teeth closest to the light. And then on the teeth which are facing the light side, pretty much do like the whole arc of the tooth. And of course the earrings as well on that side get a little daub of light. And then we're going to use amber gold. No, what is this? Golden blonde. That's what the color's called. Golden blonde. And do one last highlight in each of the bones with golden blonde. The bone is going to look kind of yellow as a result. It's a very basic way to highlight bone. It's going to work for us today. And then teeth on the necklace the same way as we did the last one, just a slightly smaller highlight with this color. Right on the outside of the curve on those teeth. There we go. How are we doing for time? We got about 20 minutes left. Okay. Now we're going to do the teeth, his teeth with the golden blonde. Now we want to put a little bit of flow improver in there just so that we have time to work with the paint so the paint doesn't dry on the tip of the brush before we get up to the teeth. And now we're going to do a little highlight on each of the tooth that the light would be hitting directly on the side facing the light. And that's kind of all we need to do on those. There we go. That's all right. Now I'm not so keen on the idea of giving them spots anymore. But we are going to. Okay, so I'm going to mix some purple, light shade purple, with a little bit of chestnut gold. Why am I doing that? So the spots have the background skin color in them already, as well as the darker color. So they look pretty stark on his body, but it should be manageable. if we need to make this, like if we need to fix anything. And it won't be so stark as if we just put a whole bunch of black dots. Now this purple is also the purple that I used to do the wash on that stuff. So the purple is also already present on the model, very close to this. And what I'm going to do is just make like some circular spots of not uniform size. So I'm varying the size. And I'm doing this in the small of his back beside his mane. In there. I'll do the same thing on the other side. And we're going to do this up his back, on the back of his arms as well. So it's going to go on his shoulders. So up here. And I'm going to do some of this on his chest as well.
Hello.
Back of the arms. I'll put a few dots in there. And then we're going to do them
This is what I
on his chest.
But you like it now.
Controlled little
You like
dots.
it more now. Wait, you like it even more now. I saw a video and I'm like, I can do that. I'll make one. So these are Moretz. Because I needed something with handles to be able to turn the stick.
Oh, sorry, I drifted off the screen. There we go.
The stick, which is this, it actually screws into the Moretz because Moretz screw in. So it screws in. So, and this part is, well, you can't see it because it's all inside, but it's basically the small cap. Has a hole drilled through the top of it to attach to. Oh no, this is glued to the top of this. And inside this, there's a stick glued to it, bigger than this. That goes through the bottom of this.
Yeah.
And it's capped off on the end.
There we go. That's what we want. Now he looks
You can't pull through. Well, I mean, you
ferocious.
you'd have to do your thing.
Some spots going on there.
See it, right? So that you get
I think he needs some on his legs too. Not a huge number. We'll do some down the back of.
Yeah, he was in today. He's a very strange little man, Mr. He was like all busted up. He could barely walk because of his back injury. He's hauling around.
We're live, dudes.
And then we explained to him, like we talked about what we're gonna do for his terrain, and he had his input, and Geoff showed him something that we've been thinking about, and he got super excited. He left, he didn't even need the game. He was like a different guy. It was crazy. Did Geoff show you our crazy ingenious solution over there? Okay. Excuse me, Penny.
There, spots on the legs as well. Just a few. We'll do some on this leg as well.
So we did these. Jordan was like, "Well, where are the doors? They're second story, third story, fourth story units, right?" He wanted doors so he could put two together and put one on top and then put a bridge on top leading into the building. But he never told us this. So we had to come up with a solution like, well, we can't rip the window off, right? So Geoff, in his genius, says, "Well, make some doors." This is just rough. You can see.
There. That's enough spots. Give him some little whisker spots as well.
No, you can't Yeah, but it's just like that, right? Like when it's stacked up, it looks like it was always there, right? And then if he wants a window, he's taking it up. And we made 4, and they go on any of the big windows, right? So he was very excited.
Bunch of dots on the face there. Do the same thing on the other side.
Yeah, people were actually talking to him. Oh, yeah,
And I think we need a reflection dot in the eye. We're pretty much there. So let's grab our solid white. Give it a little bit of flow improver.
okay. Check. Yeah, that seems reasonable.
So just a tiny reflection dot.
Me too. Shouldn't be. Well, maybe it's 2 days snow shoveling hangover. I don't know. Well,
That is not working. Maybe I shouldn't do that.
I broke it. There's like a fuel line leak, so you can't use it otherwise.
No, there we go.
So,
Do the other one as well.
whatever it was, we had to do that one by hand, like the old dark days.
And we're going to put some white dots on the
Yeah, they're not cheap.
upper teeth.
Bigger than that, but I'm not sure.
Let's put some in there. Those bones.
Yeah, my brother has one like that. It's
And I'm not happy with what I just did on that tooth. So I'm going to paint that gray again, dull it down.
to the end of the line, you have to turn it around. It's in reverse, but it's super slow.
There, not as bright now.
Well, that's the beauty of it.
Okay, I feel like some of the leather needs to be lighter. However, the final thing we need to do for now is the dots on the chest need to be glazed over. So I'm going to go back to that glaze that we made earlier. I'm going to lighten it with a little bit more Palomino gold, make it much thinner, and we're going to just put a very thin glaze of that across the dots. So the dots look a little bit less like they're painted on and more like they're part of the skin.
Like this weekend, that was a ton. So the thing with that is, if people have been respecting the overnight parking ban, when the snowplow does that, it needs one pass on each side. And it's good. So you don't get like a lot of road crap in it because it's a bunch of snow.
There we go. There he is. Our happy, or not so happy guy. We need to do a little bit of highlighting on the wood.
Oh yeah, no. Oh yeah.
So just make a little bit of golden blonde mixed in with the wood color that we made earlier. And I'm just gonna
Well, they did something smart for them. They
Put a highlight on the side facing the light, and that's it.
Shovel as much to leave to go to work. She's a doctor, so calling in saying, "No, I don't feel like coming in today." That doesn't happen.
We used to do that though, we would do that.
Yeah.
At the end, so that you guys get it.
Yeah. And I'm like, that's cool. If you do the rest later, but if you just leave it and it turns to ice, then we're both fucked. Yeah, that's
So a fun thing you can do with the wood,
a contractor, an electrician, a plumber, somebody. Well, they're not gonna park it 2 blocks up and haul all their shit to your house. You see now where it is.
I'm gonna put so wood grain has like long thin lines in it. So I'm gonna grab some of the intense brown,
Geoff told me.
and I'm gonna make a really, really thin mix. So the super thin lines to make it look like a wood grain. Just wiggly lines parallel to the axe handle. Just enough to suggest that there's a texture in the wood. There we go. That's pretty much done. Maybe a little bit more enhancement on the stone blocks. I could add a little bit of yellow into the stone color. It's a little bit on the edge of the stones, anywhere that the light would catch it, and make it like a little line. And then the final step, we've got this fur texture up here, which is not light enough by comparison to the areas around it. This was the intense brown. So I get that same yellow that I've been using to highlight everything. Put a little bit of that into the intense brown. And then I'm just going to use, I'm not going to dry brush it, I'm just going to little tiny highlights of it. And a few spots on the fur where the angle of the fur would catch the light. So like this piece along his jaw is going to catch some fur. Down here along his throat. The bit over the top of his shoulder over here. So we're going to lighten that up as well, to make it match the lighting on the rest of him. And then this crest on his head. I'm looking for anywhere that there's an outward curve in the texture, because that's where you're going to, either there or in little pockets is where you're going to get the strong reflections. So that's what I'm looking for. And I'm only going to do this on the side facing the light. I'm not doing it everywhere. That was too heavy. That was too much. And And a little bit on the back of the arms, maybe. Just enough to make it stand out a little bit more. I would say he's done. All right, there he is. You can finish up the basing however you like. Rust up the blades if you want, whatever you want to do with those things. And he's finished. So next week we are going to do Circe, the sorceress, in her traditional Greek-style dress. And that will be a fun one too. All right, cool. That's it. We'll see you next time.